On the opening weekend of the 2022-2023 season, 296 professional footballers got some form of game time in the English Premier League. Of these, only 7 were aged 34 or over, less than 2.5%. As someone once said, nothing good is going to last forever. Sometimes good doesn't even get started. In January this year, the Premier League stated that a massive 97% of players who come through the top academies will never play 1 minute of top-flight football, whilst only 10% will play more than 20 games in the top 4 tiers. It has also been documented that 35% of former footballers struggle with depression or anxiety, which compares to approximately 15% in the general population. For many professionals, being a footballer is the only world that they know. So what happens when footballers face that time, when the final whistle blows? So how do they prepare? What support is there? What are they supposed to do? There are only so many coaching roles and associated opportunities available. On this, I spoke to a number of prominent and interesting people in the men's game. The first person I spoke to was Dharius Waldron, whose footballing ambitions unfortunately got no further than Liverpool's youth academy.
By the time I was 17 and in my first year of my youth team contract, I already knew I was leaving. One of the coaches had sat me down quite early on in my scholarship and said that it would be difficult for me to progress, really, given the amount of game time I'd be given. When I joined the academy when I was 12, right the way up through high school, and even as a 16, 17-year-old, there is a huge stigma around young footballers. I always felt like I should never be asking for help, ever, of anybody. I'm a young, privileged boy playing for one of the best academies in not only the country, the world, really. What help should I need? That's how it made you feel as a kid as well. I felt like I had everything I needed and I didn't need any help. And really, I needed all the help that I could get. I needed somebody to tell me if I played well or not after the games, whether it be a coach or coming from home. I needed somebody to tell me how I'm going to get my youth team contract. I didn't have a clue if I was going to get one or not.
Once Dharius was released by Liverpool, he went to America to undertake a scholarship, flying to a new country with the aim to achieve his dream of becoming a professional footballer. I asked Dharius if he had any contact or support during this period post his release from Liverpool Football Club.
The only thing that was put in place for me in terms of my help and support when I left and to go to school in America was the fact that the academy had a very good liaison manager at the time who handled all the care of the players' transport when we lived in digs with the families and stuff, the youth team players specifically. You know, he took care of all that and he was really, really good at his job. And I had a great relationship with him. So my support and stuff didn't come from anyone else. It didn't come from the club at all. It came from him, really. I wasn't contracted to the club. It wasn't, something that he had to do, or he just kept in touch with me by phone, really. And if I had any problems or anything, he's actually the head liaison manager for the player care unit at Aston Villa now, which makes full sense considering that Steven Gerrard's gone there and they obviously knew each other from the time at Liverpool. And, I don't blame Gerrard because he's honestly the person that you'd want looking after your players, really, in terms of that stuff. But yeah, there wasn't really anything put in place to set up my rebuild of my career, really.
I wondered if Dharius was able to find support amongst his academy teammates in his time at Liverpool.
Asking your teammates anyway, that I think that would be the last resort, especially as children are ruthless, high school kids and stuff. And the last thing you want to do is ask your mate for support when he could just turn that around and turn it into banter or turn it into a joke or something like that. And sometimes you'd have like an issue you really want to speak about. You may not feel comfortable going to your mum, dad, coach, teacher. And, you might feel a little bit more comfortable going to your friend, especially if you got a close one. For myself, it was like me and there was a boy called Ryan Kent. He's from Waldron originally. He plays for Rangers now. Me and him become best friends from when we was 12. I felt like he was the only person I would ever even ask anything. We were together every day. We could speak about the little things that we didn't really want to speak about in the changing room with the other lads. There was quite a clique between the Scouse boys at the time. I had a very, very good team. The likes of him, the likes of Harry Wilson, going on to have full major careers. Wilson is international now and one of my great friends. And it was just a great team, and you didn't really want to ask them for help because they didn't really ask for help, and they were flying, or it seemed like that.
Unfortunately for Dharius, his time in America didn't work out, and after a number of attempts with lower tier clubs, he became one of the many young hopefuls that dropped out of the professional game.
I just had to realise a lot quicker that I, have to go in the real world now, get a job. Fortunately enough, some things were done really well at the club, so I got all my GCSEs, C or above, about 12. They really pushed that. If you're not excelling maths, English, science, specifically those three, if you're not getting a C or above in year 10, year 11, and you're an academy player, they'll actually interrupt your training so you can excel with a tutor in your education. And I thought that was amazing, actually, because it's quite rare for a club that is such a high level. They're only interested in the football. They actually paid attention to our education and stuff. This is crazy because I've never been interested in anything really. The only thing I love is cars and bloody playing football. I did a trial shift in a restaurant, unbelievably, and I worked my way up really. Currently, I've been there 11 months, so nearly a year, and I am now the assistant manager myself, academy footballer to restaurant manager within the space of a few years. Never ever thought it would be me. Even can't believe it to this day, but it's just how things work, I suppose. The first team training sessions of the likes of Suarez, Raheem Sterling, all the players you were looking up to as kids, and you get to train there, if you're fortunate enough.
One might think that Dharius would be dissatisfied with his lot, but he's a positive character with a philosophical outlook.
I'm glad, really. And the reason why is just because you just get stripped down, really. You have all these things given to you, and, you think that life's just rosy and dandy, and food cooked for you, travel supported for you. You are in one big bubble as a young player there. It gets even worse as you get older and the money starts to appear and stuff. And coming back into the real world, leaving the football side, totally wouldn't change it for the world.
I first heard of Dharius' story when listening to the Football Journeys podcast presented by media lawyer Matt Himsworth and former footballer Fraser Franks as part of the B5 consultancy network. Football Journeys is always a good listen, so I followed up with Matt to find out more of how B5 consultancy supports professional footballers.
So, I'm a media lawyer by trade. That's what I've done for over 20 years now. Started at a big London law firm and did a lot of work for public figures, effectively, which quickly in my career ended up with me acting for a lot of football clubs and football players. And my day job was, and kind of still is, I still do that for a living, but trying to argue in newspapers, trying to stop them writing nasty stories about clubs and particularly players. And the one thing that really came across to me during all my time and experience, no matter how rich, wealthy, successful, famous these people are, the mental health impact on football players, particularly football players are targeted by the tabloid press when their private lives are turned over, is absolutely huge. So that's what led to me setting up B5 Consultancy. It doesn't matter how successful you are, how much money you earn. Human beings struggle with identity throughout. Now, when our identity is so firmly and fixedly focused onto something, there is a lot of footballers talk about a sense of grief when they lose that. We feel really, really passionately that players should be preparing for life away from football, not in case they don't make it at the level they want to make it, but whatever happens. Because the dream is that at the age of 35, they retire as a club legend, a multimillionaire, an international. They will never have to work a day in their life. But I'll tell you this, they will want to, because we're talking about highly motivated individuals here that then have to redefine themselves. They don't want to just be, you used to be, name of footballer. They will want new challenges for themselves. And that's very difficult to do when you've been in a very sort of costed industry. And football can be, it's an incredible game, and I love it, but it can be a very one-dimensional play. It is a very one-dimensional thing, playing sport. And the world is an interesting and complex place. And I think it's our job as the people that work with sports people to try and convince them that this multi-dimensional universe is something that is really, really rewarding.
Matt has some very refreshing views on how footballers are and how they should be supported.
We as human beings should take on as much responsibility for each other as possible. And I see that in football. A lot of the football clubs that we work with take a big responsibility for the players that they release even though there's no regulatory reason for them to do so. There's certainly no financial reason for them to do so. So I think about a lad called Jordan Williams, who plays with Bolton Wanderers. At the end of his contract at Liverpool, he was told by medical staff his career was over. The only way that his career could possibly continue would be to fly to New York to have a knee transplant, which is as serious as it sounds. You need a donor. You need someone to die and then have their knee transplanted into them. And that would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. Liverpool flew him out to New York to do it. And then he signed a contract with Rochdale I think they were in League Two at the time. So there was no obligation on Liverpool to do that. Now, there is no doubt, and there are some stories, negative stories about clubs abandoning players or not showing enough care. What I see in football clubs, and particularly football club academies, is a group of men and women who really care about the young lads that come through them. And I know a lot of people within football that have gone above and beyond to help those boys and girls out.
At this point, I asked Matt who he thought had the biggest responsibility in providing support for players after football.
I think the clubs do probably have the main responsibility. I think the Players' Union has a big responsibility as well. The other aspect is agents. If you are an agent who has made or has tried to make a lot of money out of a football player, he then decides to retire and you're not making any money out of him, I think you've got a personal responsibility as a human being to do what you can to help that person. And agents have started to do this, by the way. Some really good agencies have done this, of having a real pastoral care system in that. You're not there to go and agree contracts and get commercial deals just. You're there to give good advice, help them on mental health issues, and also ultimately help them if it all falls apart. Because I think agents, what they do is they take a risk on a player. They'll pick up a 16-year-old kid and hope that he's the next superstar because he'll make a fortune for your agency. Well, you also take the other element of that risk, which is he gets released at 18 and his mental health is all over the place. And I think you need to be the one that picks up the pieces and make sure that there's a figurative arm around him and that he's going to be okay when he ends the next phase of his life.
Given Matt's interesting perspective, I was keen to hear his comments regarding players' mental health and the role of the media.
There's a kind of dinosaur view that sometimes comes from some in the older generation, which is, well, you can't talk to footballers like that anymore. They're weak nowadays and they're all obsessed with social media. But there are slightly more circumspect voices like, in fact, we spoke to Martin Keown about this and Martin said, well, when I was playing, we had match reports and they gave you a rating out of 10. And every single player in my team would go to the match reports. And if you got a 6 out of 10 or lower, you then it impacts your the way you viewed yourself and your mental health for the next week or so. The fact is, we just didn't really talk about that stuff at the time. It's not just match reports with a mark out of 10 now. It's Twitter where this stuff can find you. And if we're asking the younger generation to, well, you could just turn your social media off. Well, really, we're asking them to drop out of society now. And it hurts when people are not very nice about you, when they criticise you. I can imagine what it's like to be an 18-year-old kid trying to get into the first team, but being dropped out, not even getting into the 23s and just looking at Instagram and all you're seeing is your mates playing first team football or getting picked for England and all those other things. And you know that you have to put a little icon there and put a flame emoji on his post because that's what footballers do. They support each other. But inside you're dying and you don't really feel as though you've got anyone to talk to on that. Because actually something Jordan Williams said to me on our podcast is you're a bit worried about going, even if the sport's available at the club, you're a bit worried about talking to someone within the club and saying you're struggling because you're worried. And the club's trying to make it easy for you, but you're worried that gets fed back to the coach saying, well, he's not ready to play, he's weak. Which of course, I'm sure all clubs would say that isn't what would happen, but unfortunately some players will feel that way.
During this phase, B5 Consultancy supports the modern player with external expertise through Matt Himsworth, Fraser Franks and Crystal Palace player Leah Nicole.
We think it's important that there is someone that's slightly more arm's length. It's something that Fraser particularly does really well. And Lee has done a lot in the women's game in that respect of being that arm's length person who can just talk about what it feels like. You know, when Fraser was at Luton Town and people were saying that he shouldn't be playing and, you know, they had a live game on TV where he had the worst game of his career. And it was a lonely, lonely place. And he wished he'd had the kind of mental health support that there's certainly more of now. And I think we'll only be better in 10 years, 20 years. I think it is day on day. I think it's getting better.
It appears that the modern professional footballer has more and better support than ever. On this, I spoke with ex-West Brom player Paul Raven, who's currently an executive of education at the PFA.
Oh, it's a tremendous header! And big Paul Raven has brought Albion level.
My career finished 3 days after my 35th birthday, which was a significant time then for footballers because we used to be able to access a pension and a lump sum payment from the PFA, a non-contributory payment set up by the PFA at 35. And the idea was that provided you with some initial income to get you going and a sum of money. Unfortunately, many years later, that was challenged by the authorities, and now players don't receive that pension payment until they're 55, which we feel is unfortunate. But that was out of our control. At 16, scholarship terms, at 16, you become a PFA member. At this point, which is quite bizarre in many respects, in that the moment that you begin your association with a professional club on a contractual basis through your scholarship agreement, it's then that you're told, and the narrative is all about, it's a short career, you need to prepare for life after football. All the stakeholders increasingly talk about the need to prepare for a life after football. One thing that's very clear to anybody that enters professional football is that your life outside of football, as your employment outside of playing football, will always be far longer than ever your time as a player. There's a bit of a misnomer around football that players retire. Retirement is very, very rare. Players fall out the game. It's only really players at the very highest level, the very highest profile, who get to formally announce their retirement. For the rest of us, myself included, you fall out the game.
Regarding falling out the game, I asked Paul about how players prepare for when the time comes for them to hang up their boots.
When I was a young player, the ethos, particularly from the coaching and management element of a football club, was if you were seen to be participating in anything outside of the development of your football, then potentially, is that a distraction? Are you not 100% focused on your football? Culture in the dressing room was you were different. If you were seen to be doing extracurricular activities, including going to college or taking an open university degree, anything like that, it was not the done thing. And that culture is still very difficult to change. The thing is with the outcry for more support, there's a lot of facilitating done for young footballers, whereby everything's laid on for them, everything's laid out for them, even to the point where the kit is laid out for them every morning, the washing's done for them, they're provided with medical support and where to live. Everything's done. Everything's facilitated. The problem with that, it creates a dependency, in my opinion. And the problem with the dependency is that it erodes your ability to do things for yourself over time. Now, if you can't do things for yourself, or you expect, or you've been brought up in a culture where things are continually done for you, continually facilitated for you, it can erode your ability to do things for yourself and find your own way. And this whole thing about preparing for future transition, it's something that the individual has got to take responsibility for.
Whilst Paul advocates that the responsibility relies with the individual, the PFA provides 1,300 to 1,500 grants and bursaries, providing up to 600 different qualifications. The current budget for academic attainment is £2 million. Alongside this, the PFA look at each individual's personality profile to establish how they might guide them.
We run psychometric assessments with players, which looks at their behavioural preferences. So, and that can lead us to suggest jobs that would suit your behaviours, using support out there to find the path that suits them, not be herded into down the football route, because one, not everybody wants to carry on working in football after playing. They just think they do because it seems to be the natural way to go. But secondly, there clearly isn't enough jobs for everyone in football. Some are going to have to seek employment outside of football.
Listening to Paul Raven, he emphasises that it's down to the individual to prepare for employment outside of football. Whilst earlier Matt Himsworth enthused about the opportunity for players to embrace to what he called the multi-dimensional universe. One ex-player who both Matt and Paul could use as a shining example is former Sheffield United, Portsmouth and Stoke City defender Lee Sandford.
When I was playing football, it's just not all about football, because it's actually quite boring really at the end of the day. You're training you're a sportsman, you're a professional sportsman, you're playing football. I wanted to get another interest, so I started to look at the stock markets. Friends of mine, not footballers, outside of football, were buying stocks and shares. So I was buying stocks and shares as well. I used to do it over the phone in the old days. Now it's a click of a mouse. And I just got really interested in it. And then I'd done my sports science degree as well at Manchester Met. I liked the sports psychology. I wanted to get into sports psychology. But then once I retired at 34, I busted my neck in a game, broke my disc in my neck, had a big operation through the front. So I thought, you know what, I want to do something else.
I asked Lee whether his transition from footballer to trader delivered immediate rewards.
The worst thing to getting instant success at the start of trading, because now you think you're the Wolf of Wall Street, and you can do it easily. I mean, without success, without failure, you're not going to get successful. You need failure in your life to learn from it, and to try and fight that off and not accept it is you're blind to it. So yeah, you have the down moments, just like in sport. There's down times, there's negative, but you've got to learn from it and come back. It's not what happens, it's how you react to what has happened to you that makes you better at that skill, really.
I was fascinated by Lee's obvious enthusiasm for trading and quizzed him on whether it was more satisfying making a significant profit on a trade than winning 3 points on a match day.
I think there's no better buzz scoring a goal in front of like 20,000, 30,000 people. There's no better buzz than that. And, it won't replace making a few grand on trading at all. The buzz is at the football, definitely.
Now, could be something on here, and it's Sandford. Lee Sandford, who scored a couple of goals in one of the earlier rounds, is in the right place again.
As Lee retired almost 20 years ago, I wondered what support was in place for him back then.
So different in the 80s when I started. There was no support at all. It was just the youth team manager or the schoolboy coach that helped you. There was no sports psychologist, counselling, career development whatsoever. No sports scientist, no sports psychologist, no nutritionist. There was nothing. It was like a different world, like it was in rugby, but everything professionalised for the best, really. People close to me that had psychological issues, mental health problems, but also people that have retired from football. If there's two sides to this, okay, being released early and mentally impacting you. And then there's the other one, which I've noticed, is when people retire after a long career, what do? And they have mental health problems. And the PFA, the Professional Footballers Association, the union have gone a long way to help people psychologically. You're a long time retired. You play football. If you're lucky, you get to 30. I was lucky, I got 34. And then you got to what? You got to you're 18 to do something else. If you haven't got enough money, you need to prepare for it. And I did all my coaching badges. I got ready. I did my sports science and coaching. And I just got to the end of it and I was just bored with football. I just wanted to do something else. But I would say to them, just find something you want to do and have a passion for it and educate yourself. You just got to learn, keep on growing and do what you want and find the passion.
As we know from talking to Dharius Waldron, not everyone has the opportunity to retire at 34, 35. Another young man who experienced the disappointment of being released at 18 was Chelsea Academy player Tom Howard.
It was done over, I guess, a series of months in terms of updates about what my situation was looking like. And that was incredibly important for me to help prepare myself for what might be coming, but also maybe some things I could do in the meantime to change that decision. What I will say is the way in which it was handled by the club was absolutely exemplary and enabled me to have a real fantastic amount of time to come to terms with that in that period. And I think regardless of the fact that everything was done to look after my well-being, which it was, you're going to have, it's a dramatic change in your life. And that takes some getting used to. The support that I then had following that in terms of advice, opportunities to try something else, support in furthering my studies to, I guess, get to where I've got now in terms of going to university, then completing a postgraduate degree. All of that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't handled in the right way and then support was given afterwards. I'd probably say 6 months after, maybe 6 months to a year, reflecting on it, I was probably finding it difficult to come to terms with not training every day, not being part of the environment as a player that I had been for an awfully long time. And by no means was I ever in a emotional state where I was in a state of depression or severe anxiety or anything like that. I know from speaking to to others that is something that can happen, and I understand that. But for myself, it was more getting used to quite a dramatic change, and that being tough for an 18-year-old that probably thinks they know everything, but they definitely don't. And having the support networks from family, from the club, from close friends back home made that transition a lot easier, but it was still tough.
Tom Howard is now an academy coach at Chelsea. He's one of the new wave of coaches who are using their own life experience to support players with their mental well-being as well as their physical development.
We're talking about this issue far more now, and I think it's at the forefront of our minds. I think I have the natural feeling of what those boys may go through at some stage, and I think that's a part of my armoury that I can use to help us continue to be dealing with those situations in the right way. The transparency and regular transparency around feedback is really important so that they get an accurate gauge of what we're feeling. When coming out of an environment, if the only identity that they have any sort of attachment to is one purely based around football, I think that's when issues can really spiral out of control. So they come out of football and they think that's the only thing they had. And then all of a sudden their mates at school, their mates of mates at school, who might have only known them as a Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United, Man City player, and then they're not that anymore. They almost have this feeling of, okay, well, what am I now?
Alongside his work as an academy coach, Tom also lectures in football foundation and development, which is a Chelsea-supported degree course for aspiring coaches at St Mary's University, London. This course contains a module in elite player health and well-being, a topic very close to Tom's heart.
I think out of all modules I've taught over the last 3-4 years, it's probably been my most enjoyable one. I guess the fact I could rely on some of my previous experiences to bring that to life help. It's incredibly important that those types of conversations are happening regularly. And I know that the fact there is a module around elite player health and wellbeing gives you an indication that we are moving in the right direction. And university courses know that it's something that coaches need to have an understanding of in order to be a success in the elite game, but also grassroots game as well.
If Tom Howard works with young people at the front end of their football career, then Martin Ousley from Renaissance Coaching, through his Next Step FC programme, does a lot of work supporting the professional footballer, particularly those who are coming to the end of their playing career.
Next Step FC is part of the coaching work that I was doing. I work as a coaching psychologist in a much wider context. Back in 2018, 2019, because of an interest in football, a lifelong interest in football, and also an interest in particularly career coaching, I naturally sort of came across the two things. And my home club, which happens to be Oxford United, I've been sort of quite closely attached to for many years, and got to know quite a lot of the old journeyman footballers that came through the club, and read with a lot of interest the problems that they've been having leaving the sport. Although it's career transition that we're talking about, for most of these footballers, it's a whole life transition. It's a massive change. It doesn't just affect them, it affects their families, friends, colleagues, former colleagues. And so it has to be looked at in that context, not just as a sort of a career change. And I think it's vital that they have that impartial ear to listen to them. And I think you can get that from proper professional coaches, that aren't connected to the game primarily, so they don't have a vested interest in what that individual's going to do. But a lot of professions, you can go into that profession for the whole of your life. Clearly, there's a limit in football to how long you can play. Most people in other careers who look at career transition are doing so because they've decided they want to change career for one reason or another. They want to move into a different career. One of the things that, footballers could do is going into it knowing that they are going to have at least two careers in their life. And what would I like my second career to be?
Much of Martin's work is one-to-one transition coaching. I asked him, how does this work in practice?
Initially, the sessions are very much exploratory, just letting them have a sounding board, if you like, in terms of exploring out loud the ideas that might have been floating around their head for months, possibly even years. And, and letting them express any sort of anxieties and concerns that they have, any fears that they have. A lot of it stems from that change of identity. They can literally spend 25, 30 years when people ask them what they do saying, I'm a professional footballer. And when all of a sudden you can't say that anymore, And you have to start being able to come to terms with saying something quite different very often. You've got to make that switch in the headset of, I am now a entrepreneur, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a lecturer, or I'm this, or I'm that.
I was very much taken by Martin's understanding and empathy towards a person, not just a player.
It's pretty much entering a world that is probably quite normal for a lot of people, but to them is quite alien. It is a transition that requires a shift in who you are, essentially. But it's important, and this is one of the threads that I bring into the coaching, that remembering who you are, that you are a person. Although you've been a footballer, you are a person. There is a person there that you need to recognise and take that person forward into a new role. And that's where, having been closely associated with a club like Oxford United, who has spent a lot of time in the lower league and knowing a lot of the players and actually knowing what they do earn, even your well-paid sort of championship players, really have to kind of think hard and fast about what they're going to do.
Of course, it's easy to forget that not all professional players are multi-millionaire superstars.
A stereotype, I think, footballers earn a grand sum, does stick with people, and it does cause a problem and an expectation. It sets people up for failure almost. And one of the things that I try and encourage ones that I work with not to think about is failing. It's a difficult transition. You probably won't get it right first time. You may have to have a backup plan or a contingency of some kind. You may want to have 2 or 3 different options that you're pursuing if you can. But don't be panicked if what you think you want to do to start with after 6 months changes, because that happens in any kind of career transition phase.
One area we haven't covered that has become an increasingly popular outlet for ex-professional footballers is working in the media. I spoke to ex-Premier League footballer Jamie Mackie about retirement and his subsequent work as a pundit.
I think I had quite a few fairly decent sized injuries, and I think in the end my back was really struggling, and I think it just sort of took that. I loved playing football all the way through my career, and I think it took that fun element out of it, because to get from just one training session to the next was getting harder and harder, and I just thought, I'm not going to play as much. I didn't want to be a coach and stay in the game in that capacity. So it was almost like let someone else have a go and have amazing memories like I did. I think I always had a keen eye when I was playing. I used to do quite a few interviews and get asked to go in front of the camera, which wasn't a problem. I quite enjoyed that aspect of it. And I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't know when I was retiring, and I made the call to retire that I was going to go into the media. I didn't actually know that. I got lucky to get the opportunity to try doing it, and I enjoyed the show, and and it sort of snowballed from there, and carry on doing games now. It's great. I love it.
I wondered if Jamie had any support from any of his former clubs when hanging up his boots, and how he was helped in transitioning to the world of football punditry.
I've always had a really close relationship with QPR and the people at QPR, but in terms of getting a job, then not really. It was kind of led by me. I think my agency, who I was with at the back end of my career, have been amazing with me. With agents, and quite often the relationship you can have with agents can be very clinical in terms of just getting a deal done and that's it. But I always had a good relationship with them, and sort of they helped me go into the media side. And like I said, it kind of went on from there. It's funny playing football because everything shrunk into maybe 15, 20 years. I think 20 if you're lucky. You finish school, left school at 16, 17, and then made my debut at 18. And then suddenly, before you know it, you go through all the ups and downs, and before you know it, it's over. And you feel that, certainly at the end of my career, I felt very old within the industry. And then I've come out of it into a completely different world, what I call the real world, not the bubble of football. And I'm young to start other ventures and do different stuff with my life. I think that you're actually young, and I think that my advice to young players now I've retired is that put everything into your playing career in terms of the money that you've got, you save, put everything into recovery, live your life like the best version of a professional that you can, because the rewards and the memories that you can have at the end, you can't ever get them back. So you need to do everything you can while you're in that moment. I then think that there comes a sort of crossover where you sort of get past the 30 mark and contracts start getting a little bit shorter, where fundamentally you've got to carry on thinking about your game as your, 99% of your focus. But just in those afternoons when you are recovering, you realise it's not going to last forever. So you need to sort of lend an eye to what can I be doing. And recovery takes up a lot of time, and being a good pro takes up a lot of time. But at the same time, footballers do have a fair bit of time on their hands to try and work out what you do when you finish. So my advice would be to make sure you get that plan in place.
Jamie's very enthusiastic about his work in the media and clearly enjoys it. So I asked him whether he preferred this new world more than his playing days.
There's absolutely nothing that can replace being a footballer. Having lived through getting to play in front of people and packed stadiums and seeing so many different sets of fans and playing in front of those atmospheres is what I started to play football for. So I was very lucky.
It's a chance for Mackie! In stoppage time, Mackie, the Queen's Park Rangers!
That's the thing, being honest with you, that I miss, and I know speaking to a lot of people will always miss. You can't really replace being in the tunnel, just about to play a big game, whatever level it is. You can't replace that.
So there it is, an interesting subject with many angles. Thank you for listening, and a big thank you to my many contributors: Dharius, Matt, Tom, Paul, Martin, Lee and Jamie.